All righty, guys. Hope everybody's doing well. If those of y'all that are about to jump in, can you please let us know what our audio is sounding like? Because I am getting a lot of feedback in mine, and when we are talking, it sounds like in my earphones that we're getting a lot of feedback. Is the audio sounding good on my end? And Mr. Gary, go ahead and speak a little bit and see if yours is working, Mr. Gary.
Hey, bud. Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, you're coming across clear on mine, and my feedback seems clear. But maybe your audience can tell us if in the comments if it's messed up or not.
It looks like everybody's saying you're working perfectly. Mary Jo says everyone's working perfectly. Hang on one second. And if that's the case, I can work through it. Let me see here. Let me turn my mic back on.
We were still hearing you.
There
So
we go. Perfect. Now I had to replug it in. We're good to go. All
All
righty. Excellent. Okay. Sorry about that, guys, for the absolutely crazy start off we just did, but it was me the whole time. Today, very happy to have a spectacular guest. Quite frankly, him just speaking about his career will probably take up most of the show. We are going to get into some questions, but we've already spoken with Mr. Gary about coming back and joining us and speaking about some other stuff because y'all are going to be quite amazed at the resume that we end up going through. But I'm going to let Mr. Gary kind of give a little bit of an intro to himself, and we're just going to jump in straight with it with questions. So if you've got questions along the way, we're hitting them as we go, guys. So we'll just get them in. So, Mr. Gary, thanks for joining us. And if you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit and tell us who Mr. Gary Harrington is.
Oh, first it's Gary, not a Mister. And I mean, I know I'm old, but not that old, and or at least I don't feel that way. So, yeah, I'm born and raised mostly in North Carolina. Moved around a year in New Jersey when I was like 12. And then like 3 years in Ohio. And then back to North Carolina for high school. So we lived, my parents were children of farmers, subsistence farmers. So we were little small farm families and log cabins in the Smoky Mountains in North Carolina. And so they were that generation that were the first to graduate high school. And my mom and dad were the first of their family to graduate high school. And then they left the farm to try to make a living outside, away from the farm. But we were poor enough that still came home on to their family farms on weekends and help work gardens so that you could share in that garden when the season came. And we still kept, a hog and a cow up there. So yeah, it was, I guess we were the beginnings of middle class, lower middle class, somewhere maybe below that when I was young. And my parents, just that generation, real hard working, left the farm to try to make something new. My dad had been in the Air Force. Left the farm after some strange goings on we had on his side of the family. There'd been some bootlegging when our family wasn't on the making side of the moonshining, but you know, my grandfather got in some legal problems for supplying stuff, sugar, I think mostly, to moonshiners. And then every young man that was from a poor country family where we grew up, which was near Taylorsville, North Carolina, and my mom's family near Hiddenite, North Carolina. So, and those are like an hour and a half away from Charlotte up in the Smokies.
Yeah.
And yeah, so then but if you were a young guy and you didn't have the money for a car, but the Chevy dealer in town would give you a full race balanced blueprinted new car with like a racing engine in it. It also happened to have some tanks for carrying moonshine built in it. And you know how those young guys, you know, could get those cars and they'd make their payments by running moonshine. So
Holy
that
cow.
was, you know, that was anyway. There was about the time my dad graduated high school, is when his dad got in trouble for that, and then my dad, you know, was well acquainted with moonshiners and driving and all that stuff. So he had to leave. He left town for whatever reason and went up to Washington, D.C. While he was there, his parents got a notice that he'd been drafted in the Army. So he decided to enlist in the Air Force before he got drafted. So somehow he wound up in the Air Force. And so he did several years in the Air Force. It wasn't going to be a career. That's not really what he wanted. He served in a remote site in Alaska, and he was a radio tech person. For a while, flew on the early days of the you know, the Air Force's nuclear strategic bomb command. He was on airplanes then for a while out of Kansas. But during that time, he met my mom, and they wanted to get married, and he didn't figure being in the military was the career that he wanted for that. So he left the Air Force. But I grew up, we never really heard much about the military. I had some uncles. My mom's siblings were quite a bit older than her, like 15 years or more. So she had one sibling that served in the Navy in World War II, and one had served in the Army in Korea, but nobody ever talked about it. And when I grew up, there was never discussion of military or wanting to do anything in the military. So I never really thought much about it. Wow. And so that was, and I grew up. Yeah, I was one of those skinny, scrawny, blonde-haired kid with, we all had flat tops back in those days.
Oh yeah.
And I wore thick glasses, had really bad eyesight. And so I was a bundle of energy, but not probably one of the least likely people you'd figure to go in the military. Not destined for that. So, that was my early years.
I can imagine growing up on a farm like that and working hard. And, I think you even said on Jack's podcast, The Team House, a shout out to Jack Murphy, that you had neighbors that still had outhouses and stuff. So, it was pretty tough. It was a rough farm growing up.
I got to be honest that we didn't primarily live on a farm except for a short time where we rented for $75 this rundown farmhouse next to my grandparents' farm, because my dad would commute, 50, 70 miles to whatever work site, because he went to work for Western Electric, and he would work at remote communication sites. That was back in the day when Bell, the Bell phone company, put in microwave relay stations, and that was in case of nuclear war. And so it was mostly an underground facility that had microwave that would carry the nation's emergency communications in that event. So my dad would go to those sites and help install the equipment inside those. So he would commute, and then he would tend garden and stuff at home. But the other times we just moved around. When I was a baby, they moved like apartment to apartment, different places. And so we didn't primarily live on a farm. We lived in just wherever was convenient at the time. And we like to say, I would like to joke that, we just moved every time the law caught up with us.
How was your experience going from North Carolina or say Ohio, whichever one it may have been before your short stay in New Jersey? I have to imagine that was a bit of a culture shock for you guys.
Yeah, it was. Let's just say we had real thick accents.
Yeah.
And lived a sheltered life. I grew up when we were young. You watched Audie Murphy, John Wayne, the Lone Ranger and Tonto, and that's how I thought life was, right? And then the good guy always wins, and the good guy fights whatever odds. And then we wind up in New Jersey, and it was a very different life. We spoke different than everybody. We believed different than everybody, and so that's when I started getting a lot of fun made of me then.
I can imagine.
And I was, my teachers would make fun of our accent. And, so yeah, it wasn't the best. And I don't have a good memory.
Yeah.
361 days in New Jersey. And I was really glad when we left.
I can imagine. Back then, I can imagine it was tough. I can only imagine what it'd be like today having to transplant.
That was the 60s. That was the 60s, and your teachers were, graduates of the early 60s days of college. So it was a very
weird time,
different atmosphere than what I was used to.
Wow.
And then from there we moved to Ohio, and that was. Again, different. I was a little bit different than everybody else, and that's the first time I ran into a little gang, like the wannabe hoods. And I thought, well, in TV they didn't run, so I ain't gonna run. And the other kids, when the toughies would come around, they'd run, and I'd stand there. I'd get my butt beat, and but I wouldn't run. I didn't know how to fight. Not something my dad ever taught me, and I was afraid to tell anybody that I was getting, harassed and beat up at school. So, I learned how to take a beating pretty good, and would never give up. Yeah, it was. I guess now I think it's kind of funny that for a while, if you're want to become known as a tough guy, I was the easy win. So you get on my bus and ride to my bus stop and get off and fight me.
Jeez Louise.
I guess it's like a boxer, in those early rounds where you're trying to get opponents where you can get those win in the win column.
Get you a can or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I was that for some people for a while. And but I don't know. And maybe it toughened me up a little bit. With willpower or whatever, but and it stayed that way. We moved back to North Carolina, this time to Raleigh for my 9th or 10th grade year. I can't remember which, there. And then, you know, I think I was very mechanical when I tried to defend myself and fight. I just tried to think everything through and move. And that didn't work. I remember in high school, one time a guy, you know, wanted to fight me in gym class one time. And so, yeah, I did. But this time it wasn't like all the other times. I didn't try to think. I just reacted and just went. And I won. And it was like it changed my thing. I never lost another fight. I can't say I had a whole lot of fights after, but I never lost another one.
People know you threw those hands, so they weren't too keen to catch a fist in the face. Usually that's the thing. They pick on the people that won't fight, and when you finally do fight back, win or lose, that's going to win you some respect no matter what happens.
Yeah, I think those early ones, they knew I would fight, but they knew I wouldn't do any good. So, you know,
I mean, it takes a while. Heck, I can't even count the times from junior high to, you know, right beginning of high school. I got my arse kicked before I finally got tired of it and asked my dad, you know, old Marine, how to fight. And of course, he taught me how to punch, but he was also trying to teach me, you know, if it gets bad, bite their nose or their ear off or gouge their eyeballs out. I was like, I'm just trying to learn how to throw a punch. And quickly I got in one and I finally bloodied somebody's nose and blacked an eye. And that was the end of that. He'd fight back. So they quit messing with me. So
yeah.
It just takes a little while for people. I tell that to some of the young kids at jiu-jitsu that are getting picked on that come to class and all that. It's like, you just stand up for yourself one good time and put it in all you can, and it'll stop.
Yeah. And then just your life experiences. I think in my 30s or whatever, I've studied a few different martial arts during my life. And I was at one place studying, and they put me up. I was new, and put me up against a black belt.
Oh God!
To spar, and it was a style that had a little bit of jiu-jitsu and some other stuff, Eskrima, Philippine stick fighting, and other stuff mixed all in together.
Dang!
And you know, I was able to beat the black belt because, you know, I was just older and I've been in the military. I'm just meaner. You know, it was like, no, this isn't about the right form and you do this. It's like
coming after you.
Let's hurt something. So
actually some military training that's going to come up, because I've actually been more interested in guys that were not GWAT so to say Delta, but at least more modern day than the SOG guys that we've spoken to that were in Delta, about some combatives and such. Did you ended up from North Carolina when you came back down? Didn't you stay all the way until you graduated, or did you move again before?
No, I stayed and graduated from Millbrook High School. Matter of fact, this October they're going to have my 50th reunion.
Wow!
So that's, yeah, I graduated high school in '75.
Wow. That's heck, I think my mom was around that period as well. Yeah, I think it was 76 actually. Yeah, when they did Dazed and Confused, she was talking about, I loved that movie and would watch it multiple times a week, and she got fed up with it, but she was talking about how much that looked like her time in high school. Did you do a lot of because I won't get ahead, but we'll find out. You kind of got pretty active when you got out of high school. Did you do any sports, wrestling, football?
Yeah,
baseball?
so I wrestled in high school.
Nice.
That was, you know, that's a weight class thing. And when I'd been in Ohio, the gym it's, you know, Ohio is a really big wrestling.
Oh yeah.
So in junior high, you know, in PE, you learned a lot of wrestling. So I was on the wrestling team, but I wouldn't say I was good. You know, I lost some, I won a couple. Again, because the way I was wired in those days, I tried to think everything through. I didn't just react to something. And that the same thing that made me lose those early fights. I don't think I was
quite ready for
at that age to be really good at wrestling. You know, was pretty good in sports. I played football. I was great in practice, but I was the way I was brought up was old fashioned way that you didn't get a lot of compliments from family. My family never used the word love. Emotion wasn't really displayed. There was some ridicule, you know, just fun making by the adult family members to kids. So and then I was scrawny, thick glasses. I had a self-image problem and, you know, nervous, anxious, that, you know, kept that stuff hidden. We didn't know what anxiety was in those days, but
definitely had it.
yeah. So I was, you know, I guess I struggled through all that stuff when I was growing up. So because of that, like I said, in football, in practice, I was great, but I was really scrawny. And you know, in high school, I was probably 145 pounds ish. But in the game, I would get so anxious and everything would just become mechanical. I would just worry about not screwing up. And I did not do well in football. I lettered, but it wasn't for me. And then the track coach, you know, was an assistant football coach, and they would make us run laps, and I would always never the fastest, but the way I was brought up, you just keep running and keep challenging everybody over and over again. Eventually, everybody gets tired and you win. And so he said, "Hey, on one after practice one day, hey, I want you to come to a thing called cross country. We have a meet Saturday. I want you to come and enter it." Well, what's that? He goes, "You run like between 2.1 and 3 point whatever miles." And I'd never tried that. And I'm like, okay, I'll show up. And I did that and, you know, made all the mistakes you would think that someone would make the first time out, start out real fast and then really have a hard time at the end. But I wound up doing pretty well. So after that, the rest of my high school and college career, I stayed with running, you know, ran cross country, ran track. You know, I wasn't great, but I got good enough. In my senior year, I qualified for the state meet.
Wow.
And yeah, that first year, I guess I medaled in some sectional thing when I didn't really know what I was doing. But then, and I went to college, ran. I was never, you know, a great runner, a mediocre runner, and but it got me into college. So
I was about to say, and you know, it evidently you were good enough, so to speak, because you caught the eye of a military officer, which is a very unique and strange way to kind of find your way thinking about or getting into the military. Did you actually meet that Marine on the track that morning or that day?
You know, I think it was after. So I was a PE major after. I think I wanted to be a geology. So I never had any idea I was going to go to college. Let's just say that my anxiety, the solution I found in high school to my anxiety issues was to, like, sometimes I'd start to go into a class and waves of panic would start coming over me and breathing would be difficult.
Panic attack.
One day, nobody ever told me what that was. I didn't know what it was. One day, before I got to the door, I turned right and didn't go to class. And as soon as I walked away from class, I felt better. So that started happening more and more frequently. And, you know, I went, you know, and I think my 10th grade year, I was 14th in our class, and to failing 11th grade and struggling through summer school to become a senior. And then basically when I was a senior, you know, it was borderline, should I pass or not? And I think a bunch of teachers got together and decided he seemed like a decent guy. Let's just graduate him. So I didn't have a lot of dreams of college. You know, when I took the SAT, and I didn't practice, didn't know what it was. So you got to take the SAT. Okay. And the counselor called me in because she didn't think that score went with me because my grades were so bad. She thought that the score was too high for my grades. Anyway, so I got in college because at the state final meet after that, a coach came up to me from this little place called Campbell. It was a Baptist college. And he told me, he goes, hey, you're not the best runner out here, but I'm not going to be able to recruit the best runners. And I go to this little place called Campbell, and I can't offer you hardly anything by way of money, but I can get you in. So I thought, okay, I'm in. So I went. And then in college, then one day, either probably coming out of a PE class or something, he was probably staking me out. I ran into an selection officer from the Marine Corps. And, you know, they're like salesmen. Recruiters are like salesmen. They probably okay, I'm trying to sell the Marine Corps. Where's the places I should look? Probably PE major would be one, and maybe people that played sports would be one. So they probably talked and had a list. And he came up to me, introduced himself, and said he heard I was on the track team and blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, challenged me to a decathlon where I'd pick, if I would just listen to him, if he, you know, he'd pick 2 events, I could pick 8. And the only thing was I'd have to sit down and listen to his pitch. And we never did do the decathlon, but, you know, he started telling me things like, Marine Corps is real tough. You can't make it. You're probably not man enough. You know, it's, and I was like, what do you mean? And then he was like, yeah, I got this camp thing where you go for 6 weeks, and it's, you know, a lot of physical exercise and brutal and hikes, and, you know, there's military training and all this stuff. But he goes, I don't think you have what it takes. And, you know, if anybody ever wanted to force me a dare or something like that, it's the way, you know, I always, yeah, he got me. And yeah, he probably thought, yeah, I reeled that one in, because I didn't even have to go think about it. I go,
I'm in.
yeah, I just sign in for that. Because I remember my statement to him was, I think back then, at the end of the 6 weeks, they gave you a $770 check.
Wow.
Because this was like 1978, probably. And I remember saying, wait a minute, you say you have a camp that I can go to over the summer where you're going to give me clothes, give me a place to sleep, and feed me, and I get to exercise. And then at the end of that 6 weeks, I get paid $770. I'm in, let's go. And, you know, I went, and then I really became thrilled with the military aspect. I didn't know that. It was something, and it changed me inside, some with the anxiety things, because I grew up tough and taking a beating. So through that early Marine Corps training, the more mentally tough and physically tough you were, the more crap you can take, the better you stand with everybody else. And then I saw for the first time in my life where, like, I'm standing here, not down here. And, you know, that changed me. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's thunder and lightning here.
I just heard that. Yes, sir. You got a storm coming.
Yeah. But yeah, so I did. Yeah, I really liked that aspect, and I thought this is what I am meant to do, and it gave me a feeling of self-worth to be able to, you know, think about serving my country. And there's other psychological things, you know. Now as an old guy, I look back and go, actually, it allowed me to play the role of those heroes I saw in those movies when I was a kid. And as long as you're willing to bet your life in the military, you can be that kind of guy, right? And all it costs is your life. And like, that's it, you know, in those days, that didn't seem like that was that big of an ask. And so it became my new identity and what I strove to achieve, and what I wanted to achieve excellence in. And I drove pretty hard for, you know, a lot of years to try to live out that. Yeah.
What was when you're hooked and set and you sign up, enlist? What's the first step for you with you being in college? Do you go to the basic course or what?
Yeah, so I was an officer, and you know, I went that first summer, then I went the next summer, and to another 6 week, the secondary one, and then at the end of college, when at graduation, I got commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. And then off I went to the basic school in Quantico, where all officers go through your basic officer training. And then when that finished, I went to the infantry officers school. So I was assigned to the infantry branch in the Marine Corps.
Wow. How would you, we've not had many Marine officers. We've had a few officers on that spoke about it way back in the day, but with your wide array, shall we say, of a resume, how would you rate the Marine Corps infantry officer and the basic course and schools that you attended?
You know, a lot of this school thing, I think it comes down to a personal, you know, intestinal fortitude, willpower, character, and those. And if you have a never give up, no matter what, I mean, if you have, no matter what it takes, almost any school, I think you'll be successful in. As far as the quality of training there versus all the other stuff I did later, it was good. You know, we're talking for me 1980 now in the basic school. So all your instructors were in the infantry were people that had been young lieutenants, and some of the enlisted helped. That they were all guys, and some of them recon guys and all from Vietnam. And, you know, for me, while the rest of my generation and my professors in college looked down on people in the military, because this was that time when a lot of America looked down on people in the military, particularly Vietnam vets. I revered them, and, you know, it was just, you wanted to soak up all the knowledge from these guys that had been there doing the deal, living it out, and you wanted to be like them. I went on, in years later, you know, I went to Camp Lejeune. I was a infantry platoon commander in 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines. My battalion commander was the famous Colonel Ripley, of the one that, you know, there was the bridge in Vietnam, and a North Vietnamese tank battalion was trying to cross it, and he hand over hand, back and forth a bunch of times with explosives, blew the bridge while they were shooting at him.
John Ripley, yes, sir.
Yeah, so he was my first battalion commander. So
Holy
you can
crap.
imagine I'm a young lieutenant, 23 or 4, and that's the guy that's your battalion commander, right? Yeah, so it was inspiring, and I did a year there as a platoon commander, and then got asked to go to 2nd Recon Battalion. So then I left and but went there, went to Amphib Recon School, and then got assigned a platoon in 2nd Recon.
Wow. I've heard a little bit about amphibious recon from some of the old school Vietnam vets, but what exactly, I mean, is it kind of like buds or what? I mean, what's going on?
Amphib Recon, yeah, the picture we're looking at now, that was actually aboard a Navy ship in 1982. That would be after. But in Amphib, in Recon, the school, it was long. I can't remember, maybe 14. It was long because it was designed to take enlisted that had never had the training I had in the basic school or infantry officer school. And so all that basic land nav, all that, physical, upgrading your physical stuff from what you get at basic to a more strenuous, more elite program. They taught, though I'm not sure how much we did with weapons fire up there, but a whole lot of practice patrolling, learning recon techniques for us, because yes, you had patrolling as an infantry officer, but recon, where you're in little small teams, 5 or 6, was different. So we practiced that. And then a lot about the amphibious stuff, because Marines were meant at that time, to deploy with the Navy, and if there was going to be an invasion somewhere, it would be recon would go in first, either by scout swimming or rubber boats or possibly scuba, whatever combination. And so they trained us for that. It was really strenuous and tough, but good, because later when I came in the Army, everybody always talked about Rangers, and the Rangers are the ones that know. And if you want to make it through SF, do what a Ranger does. And I didn't have Ranger school, and I found that I knew everything as well and could perform as well as any Ranger, just based off my Marine Corps experience. I used to joke that what's the difference? Rangers and Marines have the same haircut, and one says "oorah" and the other one says "hoorah." So one's made to hit the beach, the other's made to hit an airfield, and
that's great.
I mean, that's an oversimplification, but yeah, I mean, so the Marine Corps training was great. Again, that was by combat vets, and it just very different. Everything was really focused on what it takes to be successful in combat. And
wow,
it was as the years, decades went on, it became toned down quite a bit. When I went to basic school, it was all men, and every class started with a dirty joke. And because they pushed you real hard, so people would be falling asleep all the time. And so if they decided they needed to wake people up, they often told dirty jokes too. And I was thinking that some of the things that they said and did there certainly would not have fly. Yeah, not in recent decades, for sure.
Oh gosh, I wish we could have heard some of the jokes. I bet they were some doozies back then. with you getting amphib recon and being in second recon in this time period that we're speaking about, are you with them for a float, as y'all call it, or are you changed to a rifle squad or a platoon leader and go on a MEU, or what's your next step in your...
Back in those days it was a MAU. So I took over a platoon, and my job, we were scheduled to go out on a Mediterranean float, we call them a float, to be part of a MAU, Marine Amphibious Unit, that was supposed to go on a tour of the Med. So I set as a platoon commander, I set my training up to achieve all the goals and milestones that we needed to hit to be combat ready, because you're supposed to be fully combat ready to go out on that float. It was partway through that process, somebody said, oh, they're supposed to have a scuba capability, and they need an officer to be able to run scuba. So they came to me and said, hey, we need you to go to scuba school. And I was like, okay. Fortunately, in college, I had a swimming course in my PE thing, and had a really tough teacher and had been a lifeguard and stuff. So I was pretty good at swimming. So they asked me, well, this is how hard-headed I was. They asked me, we just need you to get through scuba school before the float so you can be in charge of the dives. There's like a gentleman's course in Connecticut you can go to, or there's this special forces scuba school for 3 weeks in Key West.
Ooh.
And everybody talked about that because it was supposed to be so tough physically and hard to get through. And I was hard-headed enough in those days. I go, well, it sounded to me like right there they got a pretty good PT program down there in Key West. So I think I'll just go down there. And so off I went. And I didn't do a pre-scuba. I mean, that's like unheard of, to not go to a preparatory course to teach you some of the basics you need to pass those first few days at scuba school. My recon company wound up going to Key West to do some boat surface swimming and boat training. And this is before I went to scuba school. So then at one point, the divers, the qualified divers in our recon company were allowed to use the dive tower and tanks there at scuba school to run some requals that they needed to do. And part of scuba school's famous thing is the 40-foot tower. It's a round tower. I don't know if you've heard people describe it, 40 foot deep. And I remember, so I had no training. And so he said, hey, Lieutenant Harrington, come up here. And we got up on the edge of the tower. And they said, we're going to see how ready you are if you can make it through scuba school. And they pointed down at the bottom. You see that set of tanks on the bottom of this pool? It was 40 feet down. And I said, yep. They said, well, you're going to swim down there. You might have to hold your nose and clear your ears a few times on the way down. And then when you get down there, you're going to get the mouthpiece out, stick it in your mouth, turn the air on, and then make sure before you start trying to breathe, you blow first and then breathe. And I was dumb enough, then I just said, yeah, okay. And jumped in and did it. And that worked. I was scared, but it worked. And then a guy comes down to me, one of those guys that had been up top. And I can't remember if I buddy breathed with him or if he had tanks on. Anyway, then he pointed over to the side like this, and off to the side was this plexiglass thing that, there was a bubble of air in it. And he pointed to that, and pointed to me. I turned off the tank, air tank, and swam over to that plexiglass bubble. And when I was in there, he popped in there, so I stuck my head and you could breathe. And he said, okay, so that's so far so good. He said, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the surface. It's called an emergency ascent. And I didn't know how dangerous this was at the time, given that I did not know what I was doing. He said, yeah, we're going to go out and we're going to start going up. Don't swim up. We're just going to kick real slowly and just let rise. He said, but you have to lean your head back. And as soon as we exit here, start exhaling. And when it feels like you can't exhale, more air is just going to come, keep exhaling. And he says, if I think you're holding your breath too much, I'm going to punch you in the stomach to, make you breathe. So, yeah, he grabbed me. We held each other like, face to face, I think, maybe something like that. And we started going up. You're exhaling. And I got to the top, and then the NCO, turns, said to the officer up on the side, yep, he's good to go for scuba school. Wow. And that was it. And, it wasn't until later I learned how dangerous that was without me knowing what I was doing for embolism and all that kind of stuff. So
that's terrifying, you not knowing, and I think the tower is actually named in Walt Shoemate's honor now, but that's terrifying. I mean, I've heard from the SOG guys who were some of the early classes in there after SOG. Andre Smith is one of them. Sadly, he passed away in a diving accident, but they all said that was probably that and Ranger School were their two toughest schools.
Yeah, because in those days when I did it, scuba school had crossovers. And the crossovers, I'm sure those other guys talked about that. It's where they give you full tanks that are heavy. You have weights on you, and half the class is on this side of the pool, half the class is on that side of the pool. And this is at the end of your PT, after PT, and all the other things you've done in school. And then when they blow the whistle, this half has to fin, but you're finning really hard because you got all this weight. Oh, and the mouthpiece is tucked down in your vest, in your buoyancy vest, so you can't use it. So you're finning as hard as you can, and then you go low, and you're swimming like this, and then the other half kicks off, and they fin, and you pass each other, and yet this all has to be underwater. If you break the surface, they used to have instructors jump on your back. So people are smoked. You can't hardly make it to the other side. You've run out of breath. So sometimes people would surface early, and then the instructors would jump on them. And in those days, sometimes, after you did several, people would start passing out, and they would be reviving them on the side. And, several times my vision started getting tunnel vision and getting black and closing in, and you're close. And you'd pray that somebody else would have trouble, and if they revived somebody else, it gave you a few more seconds, because you break the surface of the water and everybody was going, and they almost sound like people are screaming, and you're just praying to get some breath into you and get ready for the next one. They eventually stopped those because too many people, it's too close, because they had to revive a lot of people on those.
That's wild. And I if I remember correctly, that won't be your only time going to a dive school or what have you. I think later on you actually hook up with the Navy, I think, for a bit. But after you complete the dive, do you hit while you're doing the scuba dive school, do you do the SF sniper school as well, or
no? So I didn't go to SF sniper school. So this was after. So I went to scuba school. got back to Camp Lejeune, went out in March of '82 on on the Navy vessel that you showed a picture from. That was the USS Hermitage. And we were supposed to do a med float, but on our way over is when Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982. So all the ships were directed to off the coast. Our MAU was directed to go off the coast of Beirut. So we sat and did squares outside Beirut. Yeah, that's a swim qual. At some point in our time there, the ship, when you've had a ship with a few hundred men on it, after a while, before people kill each other, you got to do something. So they let us do some swim training off the ship out in the ocean. This was probably in the Med somewhere, not the Atlantic. So we went to Beirut, and we were there. I actually went to Beirut 3 times during that float. The first time, our ship went in to do a non-combatant evacuation, so that we got British, French, and what few remaining U.S. people, citizens, out of Beirut there. So, put them on U.S. Navy ships and took them to the island of Cyprus. After that, we came back to Beirut and served as kind of like a peacekeeping force. And during the evacuation of the PLO under U.S. auspices from Beirut, some international peace deal was worked out, and we were guarding there at the port of Beirut while the PLO would come in, give up their arms, get on a hospital ship, and they were taken somewhere else. And then after we did that, we went to Naples, Italy, the port, where it's like, okay, finally, because everybody talked about, you go on a med float, you're supposed to hit all these great, lovely ports and have liberty, and go tour and, do a little bit of training, and it's supposed to be a good time. For us, it was, just squares in the ocean waiting to see if they needed us in Beirut. And I did not go the first couple days off the ship to I went some in town locally, but I was going to take a trip to Rome because we were going to be there, maybe 10 days, 2 weeks. And the morning I was ready to go on my trip to Rome, we got notice that the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps in Beirut, there'd been massacres there. So the U.S. was rushing us back to Beirut to start what later became known as the multinational force, which, resulted a year after my time ended with the bombing of the barracks in Beirut, killing 243 Marines. Yeah, this is us on the beach there. Our recon guys were, our mission for recon was there was a strip of beach where they would, for the rest of the Marines ashore that were mostly in that building that wound up being blown up, would bring in supplies, and where people would get on, amphibious vehicles to go back to the ships. So our job was originally to provide security on that beach. And so we built, for example, like all those sandbags there, we filled and stacked up, and to make, that was a machine gun position because we were down in a really low position that was extremely vulnerable. And the only way I could get something up where the machine guns I had could place effective fire along the roadway that was above us, was by building that. So we built like 2 of those big, machine gun emplacements.
So is this second recon right here, or is this the?
Yeah, that's my platoon.
Wow, that is a great shot. And I think we've got one more. I'm not sure if this is the same set of guys. It looks like another position you're building.
Yeah, that's one of our other positions. That picture there got me. It was put on the cover of maybe New York Times, some photo, because the press is all outside there. Everybody's trying to get a story, and now the Marine Corps is pretty stickler.
Oh yeah.
So everybody is in full uniform and all that, and then here they got in recon,
Smash.
like you don't wear underwear, you don't wear and the thing is, so I actually, as a result of the picture being put on the New York Times, the commandant of the Marine Corps decided to contact the commander of the amphibious unit and have somebody give me a talking to, and because that wasn't the image they wanted. And you got young guys. I had guys that, like, what they don't know is that we had been filling those sandbags. We filled thousands of sandbags, 20 something of us, right? And I decided, hey, this is Beirut. It was hot. Give people a break and take your shirts off. And the recon uniform, recon used to have its own special uniform. We could wear the camouflage top with those shorts.
Oh, wow.
And so, but yeah, I let everybody take it off, and we thought that was our own picture there, one of our guys, and then didn't know that press were taking pictures too.
Oh,
and they got some other one where one of my guys saw the press taking a picture, so he wanted to look like a hero. So he grabbed his rifle and is holding it with no shirt on, looking out and holding his rifle up like that. And so I was like, man, it's made it worse because that makes it look like we're trying to do our duty dressed that way, when in fact, it was only for breaks. But hey, it was a learning experience,
That had to be wild. Y'all there in a combat zone, and would eventually be, as you mentioned, the Beirut, the bombing, and having all that press around. That had to be crazy. And I mean, on top of that, I think you mentioned in Jack's podcast about y'all actually being bunked in a building, and you immediately saying that this is not good. I don't like sitting here as a sitting duck, and attempted to get out and tell other people or leaders, don't bunk here because it's going to be a bad issue.
It's what happened there. There was 2 incidents that stuck with me for things that happened later in my career. The first was on those machine gun positions that we saw. Right after that, those pictures were made, we got these giant thick plywood boxes off one of the resupply things that came in from a ship. And so I took those, because if you have a machine gun position that's out, it needs protection. So we took and put those plywood, they were probably like 6 foot square boxes. And by putting that up on top, then I could put layers of sandbags around it. And then we took 2x4s and lifted the lid up so that we had like a 2 foot gap. And then we put the top back on, and then I was able to pile sandbags on top. So now we've just made the Marines manning that position a lot safer because they have protection from overhead fire. And I mean, from my very first days in the Marine Corps, you're taught that you always have to protect position from overhead fire when you're in there. And a few days later, we're there, and one of my men calls down and says, "Hey, sir, come up here. Somebody wants to talk to you." And I went, and there was a guy in a suit, and he said, "Are you in charge here?" I said, "Yeah, of this position, I'm in charge." And he goes, "Is that wood under there, sandbags?" I said, "Yes, sir, it is." And he goes, "Well, that makes it look like you're planning on staying here. It makes the U.S. look like we want to be permanent here." He goes, "You need to take that down." And I kind of looked at him and kind of snickered a little bit, and said, "That's my overhead protection. We're not taking that down." And he said, "I'm the U.S. ambassador here."
Oh, God.
But you're in my training as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. Nobody told me about ambassadors. I didn't know about ambassadors. So all I knew is here's a guy in a suit telling me to do something I know is wrong for the safety of my men. So, I said, "Well, sir," I go, "you can tell me that, but I'm not going to remove this until someone in my chain of command orders me to do it, because you aren't." And about 20 minutes later, I got the radio call as from a really upset Mal commander that was, "You know what you've done?" And I'm like, "Okay." So we had to take it down. And it stuck with me the rest of my life that because the guy didn't want the image, right, that might go across the press in things, some little minor image thing, that we put the Marines there at a higher risk and much greater risk for death to appease that. And that didn't sit well with me. As far as that building goes, later on, the Marines gradually all moved into that barracks that wound up being bombed. And I didn't want to go. And I didn't feel it was safe. I was a proponent of, with everybody shut up in this building, we have no eyes and ears out, and that's what we do as recon. Then, you're vulnerable. You can't see what's happening on the battlefield in advance. So, I knew they were trying to get everybody to go in, but nobody had explicitly ordered me to physically come and sleep there. And, as the platoon commander, every night I would go into that building where the ground force commander would have his nightly command meeting, where he'd get an update from everybody about what was going on. Then they would tell you, what their plans were, and your intel update and your operations update. So he went around and asked everybody, where they were, and then they came to me and he said, "And have you moved into the building?" And I said, "No, sir." And then he turned to his operations officer and said, "I thought I told you everybody has to be in the building." And the operations officer, who had been one of my instructors at the basic school, and we'd had a couple run-ins because at the basic school he told me, "Lieutenant Harrington, if your brains ever get as big as your balls, you might go somewhere, but as it is, you ain't going anywhere." Because I stood up again. I kind of always liked to, if I didn't believe in something, I guess I was kind of vocal about it. But anyway, that guy, they tried to say I had disobeyed. I said, "No, I was never ordered in there. I was told that I have to cover the beach, the area by observation and fields of fire. I cannot do that unless we're physically there, and I can't run back and forth every couple hours to replace people on the beach. So I'm based there, and the colonel didn't make me come in there, and I had tried to convince him earlier in a side conversation one night that it would be best, that we had to have more people out front guarding that building, and maybe we should put, if we, instead of keeping everybody in that building, why couldn't we just put everybody on ashore? I mean, put them back on the ships and be ready to come ashore if needed, and then leave the recon people there, because we could set up LZs for helicopters to bring people in. You get trained to do that in recon. We could we already had the beach secure where they could bring landing craft in, but no, I guess the political thing was to have the Marines on the ground. So we left in late October, probably end of October. We left Beirut. I know I got back to the U.S. maybe it was early November, but I got back to the U.S. right before Thanksgiving on 1982.
Wow. And I mean, that's sad that they didn't take that in consideration. And politics plays such a, and it's especially since Vietnam, it's only gotten worse, because speaking of ambassadors, all of this crowd knows exactly how much weight an ambassador carries during wartime, because one in particular in Cambodia, Sullivan, I believe his last name, I'm blanking on his first name, he was a complete nightmare and basically tied SOG's hand behind their back when they were going into Cambodia. And they can make your life a living hell.
Yeah. And there's whole things when you start talking about covert action, there's a lot of nuance there. And then in those days, I'm not sure, in those days when they say covert action, you signed on, like, if it comes down to keeping it secret or getting that team that's being shot up out, in those days it would be there. And to me, to some extent, we've got a lot to cover before getting there, but I feel that that's same mentality as what happened with Benghazi. That's it's a shame, because as military guys, and later we'll talk about my experience in Yemen, the bombing of the coal, we'll talk about Benghazi, all those things. You have military people they're willing to risk their lives for our nation and at the behest of our commanders. And the commanders in the U.S., we have the politicians, the political class, civilian political class, that ultimately rules over them. Mm-hmm. And that's as it should be. We would not want it the other way. But those people sometimes don't take into account the lives that they have at their hands, because we'll volunteer to go anywhere and secure any place. We're going to ask you, I'll tell you when I've been tasked that, okay, I'm going to need this or I'm going to need that. And sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't, but we'll go and we'll risk. But if you start asking people to go risk, and then you start putting demands on them that, there's a point when you reach that you're tipping that scale into now something catastrophic can happen. There's like, here's what I would like as a military man to cover all my bases, my plan A, my plan B, my plan C, and these emergency things. Well, maybe I can, okay, maybe I don't need a plan C or D, and maybe I can do away with this mercy thing. But somewhere in here is this line. And if I go below that, now it
You're in
gets
danger.
where is it really you know, the saying now, is the juice worth the squeeze? It's, you know, maybe you should rethink that mission if you're going to hinder people to that point that you're, you know, I feel throwing away lives, you know, just to achieve it.
Absolutely, just needlessly throwing them into the fire. And as you said, that there's going to be a lot we're going to be covering this episode and episodes to come. But did you end up leaving for a period the Beirut situation, as we'll call it, and go to Grenada, or did you go somewhere else after your Beirut?
So we came back from that, and I was told, hey, you know, you've had a year as a platoon commander in the infantry, and now you've done a little over a year as a platoon commander and now I'm a first lieutenant. So in recon, so now you have to become. I became the assistant training officer in 2nd Recon Battalion, which I hated because, you know, now my job is to look at platoon commander's training plan and make sure that's posted and do those sort of things. And you know, I didn't want that. I'm 26 years old. I didn't mention I had gone to mountain climbing school in the Marine Corps back when I had been in my first year.
Wow.
Camp Lejeune. So now here I am. I've been to, you know, all the Marine officer, infantry officer training. I've been to Amphib Recon School. I've been to mountain climbing school. I'd been to SF scuba school. And I was like, well, I need to be doing what these other guys are doing. But no, that's not the career track of an officer. And, you know, I went up to the training officer, but then it was really odd because I got contacted by a guy that was the division schools officer. So he's the guy that assigns people to all the various schools. Mm. And he asked me to come and see him, and he said, hey, we have not been able to get an officer to pass Scout Sniper Instructor School. And the fleet needs some officers to understand what the snipers are doing. And he goes, do you want to go? And I said, I thought you had to be right-handed to do that. I'm left-handed. And he goes, you do, but we'll waiver that. I said, I thought you needed 20/20 vision, and I have real bad vision. And he goes, you do, but we'll waiver that. And I think I had not even scored expert on my last rifle recoil. Wow. And you had to be expert. And I said, and he goes, we'll do that. He goes, look, you went to Amphib Recon School, you went to scuba school, and those are schools that officers tend to fail out of. So I need an officer that will pass, and it seems like you passed. So you get to go. And I went, and, you know, it taught me so much about shooting and stalking. And yeah, it was a great school, 12 weeks. And it was, yeah, that was 1983.
And is that there's a lot of talk of, you know, who has the best snipers. Of course, the Marine Corps is known for their marksmanship. You know, my dad was a qualified expert. And what would you say the best school that you've seen? Has the Army Sniper School, has it surpassed the Marine Corps schools, or
no, I don't know. And my guess is the schools have changed a lot. This is before GWAT. So there was not much time spent on urban sniping. We didn't, like in Delta, you know, these guys are shooting through windows and through skin of aircraft, and it's just a any in an elite unit where you're allowed to, the more time to train, people will become way better at what they do. At the time, in the Marine Corps, because everything was built, I got to meet as a young Marine, Gunny Hathaway, or Hathcock.
Wow.
And he, I'll never forget, he only said a couple of sentences to us, but he was a legend, right? To look at that guy. And so there was a big emphasis on stalking, and I do not believe there was a better. I've never been to training as good about stalking and use of terrain and concealment as that was, and that was really good. And in the shooting, I never did not shoot expert after that, and you really learned a lot. But weapons have changed. Range finders have changed, techniques have changed, scopes, have changed. What your capability for night shooting is drastically changed. So at the time, we had those specially built universal scopes and sniper weapons that were available, and it was really, really good.
That's everything we've heard about, and I've spoken to a few, right before the GWAT Navy SEALs, and they went to Scout Sniper School, and they went to previous schools after the GWAT, and still said that they learned more there than they learned at any other school. Some shooting course, of course, and some of the ramped up stuff after the GWAT, but practicality and use of stuff they were using in Afghanistan.
Yep.
Absolutely perfect school, they said.
Yeah. And it was a great school. And it got me out of a speeding ticket about 10 years ago. I was driving from North Carolina back up to Northern Virginia on Highway 85 in my recently acquired truck that was the nicest vehicle I ever had, and tinted out windows, black truck, cruising with the AC on, 10:30 at night, listening to music. And it was just a deserted highway in a rural place in Virginia, somewhere below Petersburg, Virginia. So Southern Virginia. And I grew up speeding and running, family of moonshiners. So you learn how to run from cops and stuff. And so every time I would pass one of those crossways in the median, I'd look, because this is before Waze, and I didn't know about any of that stuff then. And then there was just no cops out. And then I passed by one real wide thing. I looked over to my left, and there were 4 state patrol cars sitting there. And I looked down at my speedometer, and it was 92.
Ooh.
And then, I was like, whoop, guess I'm going to see what happens now. So I just eased off the gas. I didn't hit the brake. And sure enough, with a little bit, there came a cop with his lights on, and he came. I was pulled over to the side. I had a concealed carry license. I didn't have a weapon on me at that time, but I know that they know when they run your license number
if you got it.
So I thought, oh, here I am in a tinted out truck late at night, flying down the highway. I look like a drug runner. So I figured he would have run me. So I made sure that before he got there, my window was down and my hands were on the windowsill like that, because I didn't want to get shot by a nervous cop. And the guy was nervous, and he was yelling at me, and he was like, don't move, and it started off real tense, and I just was very, whatever, I'm not moving my hand, sir, whatever. until you tell me I can move my hand. And if you want me to get my wallet, I have to reach here. I have to do that. I don't have a weapon. And gradually things got better. And then at some point he asked me if I'd been in the military, and I said yes. And then he asked which, and I said Army. He said his dad had been a Marine. So then I said, well, I had been as well. So it turns out that his father, he was a very young highway patrolman, had been one of the enlisted instructors of mine in sniper instructor school in 1983.
Wow.
So I wound up visiting with this patrolman there for the next 15 minutes. And in the end, I was kind of like, well, I probably should be getting on now. And he said, sure, have a good one. I didn't even get a warning ticket.
Woo. That's a good one, because that 92 miles an hour on that back road, that would have been a doozy on the license.
Yeah, it would have been a few. Yeah, that would have been a few things. And I've already got a bad enough history of.
Me and you both with driving. I'm a maniac, or I used to be. I should clarify that. Anybody that's watching, I was a maniac myself as well.
Yeah, I used to be.
Yeah. I've that last car wreck I had, that one put me in my place. So you complete Scout Sniper Instructors School, and I'm blanking
about that time, so I come back and I'm the training officer, and I started not liking being an officer and being in my career track. And then, I got this notice. I was like trying to think, what am I going to do? And at that time, we're talking in the early 80s, 1983, coming into 1984. The only military people that were seeing any action were the SF Special Forces guys down in Central America. Mm-hmm. And, I started having that thing of, wanting to chase after wherever the fighting is, because, a guy, you go into combat arms, you want to test yourself. It's not that you have a wish to die or whatever, but you want to test yourself. And, it just didn't seem like we came out of this long period where, the military was looked down on, wanting, so I wanted to chase after that. And the Marine Corps then told me, okay, you've been promoted to captain. So now you're going to leave and go, your next tour of duty is either going to be Marine barracks duty in Adak, Alaska, or Marine barracks duty in Guam.
Ooh.
And I was like, wait, barracks duty, that's what he wear, like the dress uniform all the time. And it's like working in an embassy, and it's like, why,
spit and polish, big time.
It's like, now the embassy guard is different, but I would have been at a Marine barracks, not an embassy. And so I wanted out. And so I started looking at alternatives and, how to get out. I applied. Another Marine that was getting out of the Corps said he had applied to the FBI and told me to do that. So I did that, wound up getting accepted, making it through the process in the FBI. But I decided that's not what I wanted. That final interview where they told me I was okay, you've made it, you can, we'll send you an appointment to go to Quantico. And it was by 3 guys in suits that were all, 15 years older than me. I'm 26. I'm single. I think I'm a combat guy, that I'm destined to go out there and do like those guys, in Vietnam and all did. And I can't do this.
Hang it up yet.
So I asked him, I went home and thought about it, and then I called him and and asked to be dropped. And I looked, because I had looked into enlisting in the Army for special forces. And so I decided I would do that. And then I was going to resign my commission contingent upon being accepted in the Army. And I went through the process. I went to a MEP station, and believe it or not, in the middle of, I went through all that stuff. In the middle of the swearing in, an officer came running in there and told him to stop, that there's a line. He showed me a line in the regs, said that former officers of other branches of the military may not enlist in the Army. So they stopped it. Well, and now I'm pissed because
Oh God!
I had just called the FBI and told them, hey, sorry. And they said, do you know how rare it is for somebody like you to make it into the FBI? And I said, sorry, I'm going to do something else. And now you're telling me I can't do this. And I didn't have a plan B. And so, but I fell back and I did my research and contacted an SF reserve recruiter and found out that wasn't a rule for reserves.
There you go.
So I then turned around and enlisted for special forces,
Reserve.
in the reserve. And
wow.
And so I did that, and then I got qualified as an SF medic because, of course, I want to be a weapons guy. Weapons are demo. We all want to be. But the program I came in, they said, yeah, we got all them we need. You can be commo or medic. And I sure as hell didn't want to be a commo guy. So I said, okay, I'll be a medic, and enlisted. So then I went through, as a reservist, I went to airborne school. I went to the 91C school, which is kind of like, they made me a sergeant in the Army Reserve. So I went to the first medical training for like post boot camp military people. So now I'm going from being a captain in the Marine Corps to being and to me, the Army was like, especially the medical aspect of it compared to the Marine Corps, was not as strack, and it was a very different atmosphere for me. And then I went through the medic course. And then once you're qualified as a medic, which was a shortage MOS on active duty, how I backdoored the rules to get on active duty was that now, a year and a half later, I'm a airborne qualified special forces medic. I went to the Q course, went to the medic course, all these just school after school after school. And now I'm an E5 medic, and medic is a shortage MOS on active duty. So the rules allowed me to apply to go on active duty. And then, I would go through the whole thing again. And then a recruiter, the guy for the contract, was like, wait a second, aren't we
we just did this
going around this thing here? And I said, yeah. I go, but you can either look at it that, yes, I was a former, at the one part of the reg that says I'm a former officer, or you can look at the other part is that I am a qualified NCO in a shortage MOS that you desperately need on active duty. And I'm here and I have a good record. So, hey,
sign me up.
What are you going to do? And so they let me in, and
wow,
I went to 7th Group, which is focused on Central and South America, to start out.
In this time period, where is 7th Group HQ, or where you looking?
At Fort Bragg.
Oh, it was at Bragg. Okay.
Yeah, Bragg. In the beginning, in the 80s, when I was there, like 80, I probably showed up at 7th Group around 85, maybe 85, 86, one of the time frame. And nope, I take that back, 87, because I was in training pretty much because I had to do airborne school, that basic medic course, the Q course, the Special Forces medic course. And during that whole time, the CIA contacted me, and that kind of derailed my stuff for a little bit. And it's a longer story for a different day, but I didn't, due to I went all the way through the process to get in the agency at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a sudden, kind of like we're doing with Doge now, big cut in the military. And I got a call while I was in a training thing in the military saying, hey, we can't bring you aboard. And that was after I'd already passed the polygraph and all that other stuff.
Wow, you were way in.
Well, but you know what? I just took I graduated that school. It was the Army, the Special Forces Operations and Intel School.
Oh, no. Okay.
The agency, and the agency actually got me the slot because they said we're gonna bring you in, but we don't have time to put you through our training.
Wow.
So go to this, and then we're gonna like deploy you immediately. And
jeez.
But when that failed, I just did a packet to go on active duty and hand carried it. Spent like 3 weeks living out of my car, driving from my reserve unit in Ohio to DC, down to Bragg to do some interviews. And yeah, after 3 weeks, I was on active duty at 7th Group.
Wow. Oh, gosh, I didn't even mention to bring it up. Your reserve group, was this 19th, 20th?
It was back in those days. It was the 11th.
11th.
This was before. Back then, there was a difference between a reserve unit and a
National
Guard unit.
Okay.
That unit later became part of the 19th group.
Wow.
And I sent you pictures. Like I think it's really funny because I felt I only did a few training exercises and drills with my reserve unit because I was honest with them. I said, hey, look, I'm in the reserves, but the picture in Germany is actually when I was a reservist.
Oh, let me pull that up while you spoke of it.
So I was honest with them that my goal is to get on active duty, but I will come to drills and support you every way I can. And then they were going on this exercise called, not Reforger, maybe it was Reforger, which was a big exercise simulating war against Russia held in Germany. And that reserve unit was going to be part of that. And I was just graduating O&I school. And I just came out of the field from the final exercise at O&I school and it was in O&I school. I met my first 2 Delta guys and learned what Delta was. Anyway, I graduated, and while everybody else was kicking back, I had to run out of graduation, repack my rucksack, and jump on a commercial plane and flew to meet my team at an airport in Ohio. And then we went to a base somewhere. I don't remember where we went, probably Pennsylvania, and got on the airplane and flew to England, where we isolated to prep for this
exercise.
Yeah, we isolated at Sculthorpe Air Base in England in an old housing unit, World War II housing unit. My team did, and then we made a combat jump a simulated combat jump at low altitude into Germany. 5 days later.
That's an awesome way to start your first little action with your first Special Forces group and team.
Yeah, I had done a few weekend drills where we went to the field and did stuff with the reserve unit, before. But yeah, that was that was, full on mission profiles. And we did 2 missions during that time. So that, it was interesting. The picture you showed was my portion of the first part of the mission. Was me and 2 other guys were supposed to go recon and put eyes on the team's extract landing zone. So there was going to be like a Pavlo helicopter come in and pick the team up. But it was ridiculous because actually the second half, we had some mishaps, and some lazy people got captured during the first half of the mission. And for me, they had like pieces of paper on them that had the grid zones of that extract landing zone. So I thought, this is crazy. We're going to go sit it was like a week out here on this landing zone. They're going to come and scarf us up, which we'd already been in E&E on the first half, and this big, another long story. But so I decided that, and I was in charge of our little element, that we were going to go walk far away from where that landing zone was, and we would hide out, and that then like 48 hours before time to extract, then we would go to that LZ to minimize our time being scarfed up like the team was. The people with me on the first half did not get captured. Everybody else on that team got captured because it was like part of the exercise was to put a team in E&E and send all these, giant units to hunt them down and all that stuff. And the people with me, we didn't get captured. Everybody else did. So I wound up walking and walking until we came to this tiny village. And when I say village, it was like 3 or 4 houses there. And through my broken German, which I learned from watching combat, if you're my age, you remember the show Combat, and stuff like Sprechen Sie Deutsch and stuff like that that you learn. So I said a few words, and then I walked up to these, left the other 2 guys hidden, walked up to these people, took out a little notebook, and I drew a cow, and I pointed to the cow and said, "Moo." And the woman told me the German word. I forget it now. And I said, okay. And I got that word. Then I drew a stick thing of a barn, and I pointed to that. And then she gave me the word for barn. Wow. And then I pointed to cow and said that German word. And then I went, and she said, "Schlafen." And I said, for sleep, right? And I said, yes. And I said, cow, schlafen, and barn. And then I said, me, schlafen, barn. And they looked at me kind of funny because, but then they kind of understood, and then took me to, that family ran like a little restaurant cafe in there called a guest house in their house, 200-year-old house. And that's put me in the garage. Then I went out and brought the other 2 guys out of hiding, and we ended up staying there at that house. And it's really funny because I wasn't SF yet, or I was reserve SF, but I set up my first network because eventually they took me to some other village where a woman spoke English, and I told her what we were doing. And I wound up recruiting this family and another family and somebody in the other village, and set up my own civilian network to look out for there was German military and U.S. conventional units that were searching for us. And at one point, this network I set up came and informed me that, hey, there's 2 other Americans that are hidden in somebody's barn, and the German army's closing in on them. So we put on civilian German, and by that time I'd already gotten rid of these military clothes and wearing clothes from
the German
family. And I get in their car and we drive up, past the German army. And I learned enough German phrases that on initial, I'm pretty good at imitating accents. So I could pass. And we wound up going up to that barn, telling those guys, "Hey, you're about to get captured." And we got them out. So that's why you see more people in that picture, because then we hid them with us.
Wow.
And then went out and, at the appropriate time, we went out and went to our LZ and marked it and secured it, and everybody extracted. 8 or so years later, I went back to that same family's house as when I was on a different kind of trip, and took a day off, and drove out a rental car out to that village and found that family.
That is too cool. Was everybody still in the exact same place and living in?
That little kid you saw in that picture I didn't see him, but they were big. The grandma was still alive.
Wow.
And I talked to the wife, and Martin, I think, was the husband, and talked to him.
That's too
cool. We shared some memories. They gave me like big giant stack of photos. They had like hundreds of photos they had taken with us of us while we were there. I didn't give you those to post because a couple of them have way too many beers. They did have a guest house. So
when in Germany, I mean, you got to do as the Germans do. Gosh, that's such a cool story. That is what a way to get started in special forces, man. So with you completing this as a reserve soldier, what was your first action or job or duty with 7th Group?
With 7th Group, when you're new on a team, they're going to run some field exercises to see where you are tactically and all. So, and that was interesting for me because when the guys in Marine Recon, it wasn't in those days, it wasn't force recon. So it wasn't a tryout based thing. People got assigned there. Then you either made it through Amphib Recon school or you didn't. And the experience level was lower. Like my most senior guys in my platoon, later, at one point, I had a more senior platoon sergeant. It was the guy in UDT trunks in that one photo with me on a ship. Mm. But most of the rest of the time, it was just 2 E5s that ran everything. Everybody else was an E4, E2, E3. It was PFs, a couple PFC, mostly like Lance corporals, a corporal or two, and then the 2 sergeants. So in my imagination, when I thought of a special forces team, I thought these are all going to be predominantly E5s, 6s, and 7s that have spent many years out in the field doing this. And I thought they would be like what I dreamed of those Vietnam guys and on the LERPs and just like ghosts moving through the woods, and their skill level was going to be so high. And I was like, man, I've finally made it. I'm going to be in that. And yeah, I found out that wasn't necessarily, the truth. That the Marine Corps and those NCOs that I had really done a good job training those guys, and they were good, and they were really good in the field. So I found that I was, kind of pushing at some there, and there were a couple guys that had been to Ranger School that were pretty hardcore. So, it was good. And I was on a scuba team because, I showed up, and scuba teams are always hard to fill in SF because it's hard to get people through scuba school. Scuba teams were always more of a running team because at scuba school, in the old days, you had to run 2 miles in 12 minutes. I don't know what passing was, but that was the goal. And when I went, I did. And so scuba teams always did a lot of running. And so, yeah, I got immediately, and I was a medic. So medics are short, and then scuba medics are really short. So
scuba team.
That was, it was scuba team. And later on, I went to dive medical tech school, when I was in 7th group.
Wow. What all entails in that school?
Well, you learn all the medical things for treating embolism and all the other dive related injuries, and what dysbaric osteonecrosis was. And you learned more important things were what immediate first aid to render, how to diagnose, and to run the chamber. So you learn how to run the oxygen chamber, and we practice that on each other.
Wow, that's heavy duty. And yeah, that's always crazy seeing y'all, the divers and everything. I'm always worried thinking about diving of getting the bends or some crazy stuff like that. I've seen some deep sea divers getting in those bells and decompressing, and I'm like, that is
later in my career, I ran across some guys that had been in a deep sea divers, and one of them had been in a classified dive thing that really pushes the boundaries of what the human body's capable of as far as depths go. And he was all screwed up, right? His, just walking around one day as hip shears, and walking around another day as shoulder shears, and all from dysbaric osteonecrosis, right?
That is, wow. That is terrible. Wow. Is there any, well, I don't know if anything's going on. Are y'all deployed, the scuba team, for any incidents?
Not incidents. We deployed to Honduras a couple times. That was during the time the Army, and I actually went to Honduras towards the end of I guess the last thing I did as a platoon commander in recon was I deployed for a short exercise in Honduras. And the first time I ran into any of those guys that were running in and out of Nicaragua at the time. So where I'm talking the mid 80s now, that I'm going down to Honduras a couple times. Once we were up in the mountains training, it's no longer in existence, but there used to be a Honduran Special Forces unit. So we were way up in the mountains by this real big lake called Lake Ochoa. Mm-hmm. And we trained those guys. I got to do my first high altitude dive because it was a big, huge lake. And you do your requal, so you continue to get your dive pay, right? So we found a reason to go out there and dive. And I'm trying to think the next time I deployed to Honduras, I deployed on a medical training thing where it was just for medics. and we went with like a surgical team and went down so we could do surgery on people. Like nobody in Honduras is going to sue you, if you're not an MD. So that we would go and we'd have a surgeon watching us, and we would do medical quals, everything from delivering babies to, field amputations. I did a week in medical. I probably pulled 700 teeth or stumps in that week, because when people in remote villages found out that there were Americans given free medical care, about 6:30 in the morning, you'd have a line 200 people deep, and it was just one after the other, pulling them. And my dental week, you didn't do much work on teeth. It was people that had rotten teeth with stumps in the gums. So really about the only thing you could do would be to get that out, and maybe sometimes treat an abscess or something like that. But did some, minor surgeries, saw a lot of tropical disease stuff. And so it's good training for medic. Did that. The only interesting thing that I'm willing to talk about that happened is there is at one time when we were staying up in the mountains, I hitched a ride down to a place called La Ceiba, Honduras, down on the coast, where the rest of the company was, because we were in a rural remote place in an austere training camp. And they, had access to a town. You could get some beers and go into town. So I hitched a ride in the back of some local truck, stake bed truck, and I just rode hours through the mountains and got to La Ceiba. And while I was there in La Ceiba, I ran into this old guy, and he told me he was a pilot. He was an American. He was a pilot, and he was flying around. And I said, well, I got to get back home tomorrow. And he said, well, I'm flying up that way, and you're leaving La Ceiba, where La Ceiba was. You go towards Nicaragua, up in the mountains to where we were. And he said he was going to be flying in that direction. And he said, if I liked, instead of trying to hitch rides, he'd fly me. I forget where he said he could get me to that was closest to there. And I thought about it, but in the end, I was like, I don't know this guy, it's some kind of older guy. So I turned down that chance. And it turns out, I only read about this later, he was the guy, kind of a nutsy. He wasn't some CIA secret guy. He was kind of a nutsy civilian that flew over the border doing his,
flying
sightseeing thing. And the Nicaraguans forced him down and held him for a while. And I thought, my gosh, if I had gotten in that plane as a special forces soldier and been forced down in Nicaragua, I probably would have become a prisoner. So I was glad I did not.
Ain't that the truth? My gosh, I remember looking that up after hearing about it in one of your other interviews. I was like, geez Louise. Did you? I think it was while you were in Honduras. Also, was this one of the other times that you had heard about Delta from your sergeant major that was actually in blue light?
No, that was in seventh group. My sergeant major. Oh my God! I hope the guys in seventh group will forgive me.
Was it Paul?
Forgetting his name. I'm trying to remember if it was Pauk. I think it was Sergeant Major Virgil.
Virgil Pauk. He was in Solo.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And yeah, he was a hardcore dude.
Bad dude.
so it was in seventh group, you know, I started hearing guys talk about Delta, and it was like, yeah, there's this thing, man. It's like Delta, it's secret. And they have this thing once a month where you can go take a PT test and see if you qualify. And everybody always said like it was the ultimate thing. It was like a secret thing. And that, you know, it was the penultimate thing for a military person to do. And everybody always said, one of these days I'm going to train up. When I have time to train, I'm going to get myself ready and I'm going to go. Now, we're already on a scuba team and we're fit. And I'd never, like, I always maxed out the Marine Corps and Army PT test. And I was, you know, always been like one of the fastest or second fastest runner at any distance on a team. And I thought, yeah, you know, if it's a physical thing, I can handle it. So I just kept my mouth shut. But then one day instead of going to my PT, I went to the place where they had that PT test and took the PT test and wound up going through a process and going to Delta selection. And that was when Virgil Paulk, when they got notice that I had been picked to go to Delta selection, they, you know, he called me in. He goes, hey, you know, and then he told me about the whole blue light thing, and that I don't think they looked kindly on these upstarts that were there. And you know, they were really short dive qualified medic, DMT, right? So you're hurting your unit when you try something like that. Mm-hmm. But I did. And he told me, yeah, go ahead and go give it your one shot. And I went, and that's the first thing in my life I didn't pass. That's a long story about selection. What happened, I probably, the summary is I overtrained. I was already super fit, and I overtrained. And in the months leading to it, you know, I was on odd days, I would run 7 miles and then get a 50-pound ruck and do like 30 times the stairs on a 4-story building. And then go lift weights. And then the other days I would do 13-mile rucksack, you know, marches and running with 50 pounds of sand in a rucksack. And I didn't realize, because it was all motivation, and I was just really
beating yourself up,
focused. And I didn't realize that I was eating away my reserves, that I was losing weight. All I knew was train. And, you know, I would get up at like 4 a.m. to go train, so then I could go to my regular SF team and for the rest of the day. So I probably went to selection, not optimal, and I went and had done pretty well. I had a couple really good days and a couple mediocre days, but then I had a day where I broke my compass and hadn't realized it, or malfunctioning compass. And I'd never before had one that was locked. And, you know, I got way behind the power curve. Then I realized what was wrong with my compass, and I go to my wrist compass, backup wrist compass on my arm. And when I'd been climbing over deadfall, you know, it had broken off the little bubble thing. So, it wasn't long after that. They didn't kick me out that night. I think the next day they wanted to see how much I'd give, I think. So we did the next day. And by now, you know, because I had already now done more than the other people in selection had. I think my juices run down, and I had a mediocre day, I would say, that next day. And then they told me, you get in the back of the truck. When it stops, you're not in the woods. You're back at Camp Dawson in West Virginia. And they say, okay, unfortunately, for you, selection is over. But then they told me that they liked me and that if I wanted to come back, I could come back. So I went back 6 months later, and this time didn't overtrain. I made sure I ate a lot, because I went home. I actually don't know where that picture is. There's a picture of me right after I came home that first time. And I look like an Auschwitz victim. It's a kid with me and my stepdaughter, and my neck is all sunk in. My cheeks are all sunk in. I've got scratches from running through briars and stuff. And it was bad. So next time I went, I didn't overtrain before I went, and I gained as much weight as I could. And I knew kind of that it was going to be a key for me to intake as many calories as I could during the time I was up there. Mm-hmm. So I brought all kind of supplements and stuff to try to do that. And it still was a very, very difficult thing. And I almost blew it on the 40 miler at the end. But that's after you've done a day where you've probably done 8 or 9 miles, and then you come back and have a few hours to rest and prepare, and then you do the 40 miler. And at least that's how it was in those days. So but in the end, I made it through. So.
Wow. Did you kind of feel, I don't know, pressure, or did the second time around feel any more difficult or a little easier since you knew what you had to face and you had already toughed it out through the majority of it that first time?
Yeah, well, it's like, before I said that I'm used to be anxious, or had been, right? Mm-hmm. And you never get rid of that. No. That's there. I still have that. It manifests itself in different ways now, and you learn to control it. I guess nowadays people take meds for that shit, but that's not what I believe. So the first time you're naive and you believe all those things, like everybody up there believe there's hidden cameras on you all the time. They hear everything, and you just put this. It's how much pressure do you put on yourself? Mm. And yes, it's extremely difficult physically. It's extremely difficult mentally. And what it really comes down to is you can use land navigation, because I was an instructor later on twice for selection. But you can use that medium of an unknown time thing. So there's that mental pressure and the physical stuff you have to go through to watch a person, how they deal under stress and physical difficulties, right? So and they do that, right? It's unknown. I don't want to give away everything about how you do in selection. There's a lot of people that have talked in detail about it.
Oh yeah.
But to be honest, it for somebody that loves challenges, and if you in the military, for me, it was very gratifying to finally be tested to the utmost of your ability and pushed hard, even though a lot of that's what you put on yourself. Now, the second time, I tried to enjoy things. When I walked, I love being in the mountains and hiking. So I tried to, think about the scenery. Walk hard, mister. Just walk hard. And I didn't try to run every chance I could run, because I was like, you don't have to run to make it. If can walk really hard and I was one of the fast. I was probably about one of the fastest people there. I won. You know, I was first in a few of the events. But then I had a couple where, you know, you struggle. But it's decision making when you're that tired, and every day it gets a little heavier, and it's a different type of terrain, and it's a different set of problems that you have to decide. It's all decision making. Here I am here, and I have to go over here, and now I'm looking at a map and all this terrain and stuff in between, and how am I going to move from here to there in the shortest amount of time? Is that going to be follow an azimuth up and down, or try to use terrain and go around to make it less on you, or shoot something in between? How are you going to do that? So it's, and how can I move fast and still accurately navigate? Because sometimes it's, I'll follow this draw or ridge for so long. Now I can just put my head down and go, right? But then there's times where you have to slow down and use precise navigation to hit that critical turn or whatever. So it's all that decision making when you're increasingly going into a deficit of your energy stores. You're physically tired. Your muscles are screaming and aching. So I think it's a good thing. And I think one of the things they probably look for is your will and your, decision making under pressure. So yeah, it wasn't without difficulty, but the second time I did make it.
And what's crazy is, that's, just getting your foot in the door, you pass that, and then you've got to go and complete OTC and, whatever else that may involve along the way to actually become a full-fledged member of CAG. I mean, that's a crazy first test.
Yep.
How, and, we're going to do another show, guys. We've only got about 45 minutes until we're going to have to let Mr. Gary go. And as a matter of fact, we'll talk a few more minutes, and I'm going to let you decide when we maybe get into fifth group, if you want to stop for fifth group so we don't rush the CIA.
Sure. We can do that part, because and then I'll try just to summarize the Delta stuff. I guess. I mean, everybody wants to hear about Delta. My time in Delta wasn't that long. We can cover that. And then will people want to ask questions? You want to take a few?
Do you want to, how about we get to where maybe you go through the piece of Delta, and we do have a few questions, and maybe we'll hit those. And how about we leave your fifth group work and your CIA work together? Since I think that would be a good part too, with no rushing.
Okay.
So you basically, after you complete OTC and such as that, and if you'd like to speak, I don't think you're allowed to share anything on OTC, to be fair. But after you do pass OTC, we know at that time, I think they had 3 squadrons, and I think they need Spanish speakers, and you were a Spanish speaker, and you end up with a squadron.
Yeah. So, there's a lot more about the whole OTC thing. And, I had the pleasure of doing OTC twice. And if you think, I thought I've been to some hard stuff. OTC was hard, but OTC does what it is supposed to do. And nobody gets to shoot as much rounds and do full on intense training as they do. I don't know if they used to say it costs $1 million to put each guy through. I don't know. But it was intense. And eventually I wind up in a squadron, and I hadn't been there that long. I think on Jax we talked about the free fall stuff, but I think that's kind of takes away from the whole story, career thing. So yeah, like, so you do OTC, and part of that is free fall training, you know, at the end. So I became Halo qualified, and I spoke Spanish because of my time in 7th Group and down in Honduras, and I'd been down for the invasion of Panama, and I didn't realize how well I spoke Spanish, but I guess I was fluent. And there was this deal going on in Colombia, and at the time, you know, I think a lot of that's been declassified. Bowden's book about the hunt for Pablo came out, so that it was probably part of a covert activity at the time, you know, that some military, some SOCOM classified units took part in that under agency auspices, right? So yeah, I went down to Colombia, and we was doing some stuff in support of that, the hunt for Pablo Escobar. And matter of fact, my portion was I stayed with another guy who was doing eavesdropping on communications from a suitcase, and we had set up a giant telephoto lens with a camera, and we were doing surveillance on a couple compounds that had been friends of Pablo Escobar's. So we were looking to see if he would show up at any of those places. So it was kind of we would do turns doing on surveillance. I couldn't run his equipment, so he did his stuff there. So it was a 50% on. So one of us would be, you know, at night, always one person would have to be awake and on full alert and armed, while the other would try to get sleep. And then the rest of the time we were up there. And then eventually they decided to shut that part down up there. We were in the prison, that prison that Pablo paid to have built himself.
La Cathedral.
Yeah, where he had been a while. And then, you know, during our times when he was out and we couldn't find him, everybody's trying to find him. And yeah, I got in trouble because I had traded for, when I showed up at that place, there were other people there that we relieved. And, you know, it was like first cool mission, and the guys were telling me, hey man, it's okay if you want to grab a souvenir, but if you do, you got to replace it. The commander says you got to replace it. Like they were saying, zapatos son zapatos, shoes are shoes. So like, you know, guys would be guys. Like I look at all the people I know from a lot of JSOC units, they have souvenirs from a lot of places we went. But I was trading for some of the souvenirs there, and yeah, some stuff that was Pablo Escobar had been, you know, some infamous photographs of him with or wearing, or some book that he had written. And so it comes time, and I made a deal with the commander there that, you know, well, I'm going to take this stuff, but I'll send back up and replace this, because I have to be able to get to a shop down in Medellin. So we were above Medellin at that prison at La Catedral, and Medellin was down where the other guys were. And they sent one helicopter to load out our gear, and then it was a real small helicopter. So piled our stuff on there. And like one of the things I took, we were staying in what had been Pablo's finance guys' house, little hut. And so Pablo's little mansion was fenced in. And then this next one was up on the hill right behind it. And, you know, like you're bored, there's downtime, you're up there a long time. So like stuff I did was like go through every piece of garbage, and
Yeah,
I could
absolutely.
find, like he was a finance guy. So like I was finding checks and taking pictures of checks with their serial numbers to see if anybody, you know, could use that stuff. And yeah, and part of that, I found like a plastic bag that had like some ball caps and then some like joke stuff. And I didn't think about disguise, but like a hat that had like long haired wig,
Oh man.
stuff like that. So I thought, oh, these are cool. I'll grab a couple of them. And anyway, that helicopter shows up and I put all my gear and stuff on that helicopter, and it flew down to the base and then came back, and the two of us got on and went back. And the night before, or in that interim between that, I got a radio call from the guy in charge, and he said, hey, you know, don't grab any souvenirs up there.
Uh-oh.
And I was like, oh, I just put them on a helicopter down. But now we are on a radio, right? We're on a radio, and I did not want to, you know, on a radio
Say.
thing. So, you know, I'm a man. I feel I'm a man. I'll you know,
Admit that.
I'm going to just go down there, and the first thing I'm going to do is tell him. And I flew down there, and first thing I did, I got off the helicopter. I went up to him. He was working out, and I asked to talk to him, and I told him what I did. And when I did, he just blew up, man. He just blew up, and it was just a lot big overreaction. Now there's another, you know, by some stuff that came out in books and stuff later, I understand there were other things going on, and you know, I understand that, but he hit the ceiling and told me he was too angry to talk to me and sent me away. And then I was talking to another operator guy, it was a sniper guy, and I said, I just don't understand this, and made a comment that he's not even listening to me to tell him what's going on. And when he's doing other stuff, and that got reported back to him. And he thought, I think what he thought was I was going to rat him out, and which I wasn't. I didn't understand, as a man on a team and my time in the military, I'd never, you know, that you talk and you explain things. You know, I'll take the stuff back, but then there's all these other people that have all this other stuff. And what's
guns, memorabilia, shoes. I mean, they took everything. Not saying Delta did, but a lot of people there, including DEA, had a lot of Pablo stuff.
Yeah, but I no. Now you look in hindsight, and I think there were other reasons, and I've seen some people on some chats now, and actually former Sec Defense. I don't know how he looked into it, but I think Chris Miller actually, after he appeared on Jack's podcast, told them some things offline that, you know, about that incident and the politics behind what happened. But anyway, I got sent home, and wow, it's a long thing after, because, you know, I got a call. I come in through the airport in Miami. I got a call to go to a phone over the intercom. I picked it up. It was my squadron sergeant major, and he's saying, hey, when you come back, you can't tell your team commander about this. You can't tell your team leader. You can't tell your wife. You can't tell anybody what happened, and we're going to decide what to do to you or with you later. And nobody'd even asked me yet, what happened? What's your story? Write it down. Nothing, statement, nothing. And, you know, I went weeks and weeks. I got some threats made against me. And eventually I went to the unit psychologist because I just couldn't understand it. I was like, you know,
what's going on?
Yeah, what's going on? Nobody's talking to me. I can't talk to him. My team leader, right? My team leader wants to know what's happening, and I'm telling him I can't tell him. And you know, in hindsight now, I'd have told him everything, but you know, so then I just felt like I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the psychologist because I thought everything you tell the psychologist is in confidence, and you know that, and it can't be held against you, so you do that. And I told him, but then I guess he felt that stuff had gone on down there that might cause a problem for the unit. So he went to the unit commander, which was Brownlee, right?
Bargewell?
No, not Bargewell. I'm hating that I'm screwing these names up now. It was religious guy, went on to be a 4-star. He speaks now.
It's not General Vaughn. If I know who, if I was just reading about your time period, I would know.
Before Schumacher or after. No, he was the guy after Schumacher. Not Brown. Not Barnes.
People are going to kill me in the comment section.
He's written a big book. I'm sorry. I'm an old dude, right? But and the next thing I know,
was Blabber there? Was Pete Blabber?
No, he was much lower ranking then.
We'll figure it out here soon. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it would have been 1992. Whoever was the commander in 92, but he called me in and he talked to me a little bit, and then you know I left, and that was what sealed my fate, because I guess at that time, you know, politics and protection of certain individuals came into play, and my squadron commander contacted the Delta commander and said, I want this guy gone. So I was gone. I got kicked out, and yeah, so got a chance to try to restart my career after that, which was a devastating thing, right? All my years of pushing and trying to make the best, I thought I'd finally achieved it. Here I am in the most elite unit in the world, doing secret missions, and I've never had, you know, a problem. Now suddenly, you know, in those days, what we call them was a shitbag, and you know, I'm the worst kind of person there is, and I'm suddenly kicked out. You know, what am I going to do? And it was, yeah, I'll say that kind of sets the tone for what happens after, which we can talk about next time. But it was a devastating thing. And with that, if you have time left, maybe that'd be a good place to answer any questions up to this point.
Absolutely. Great points. Okay, I'm about to run through 2 or 3 names because I've got to at least give it a try. Was it Boykin?
Yep. It was
okay,
Boykin.
Perfect. Nailed it, Jason. I've got the book open, and there were Boykin, and I was either going to go with Garrison next, but
Garrison was the guy that ran the board that let me in the unit when I made it through selection.
Holy cow, that is too cool, man! You're kind of like Forrest Gump around important people here that pop up in your story.
Schumacher was there. I briefed Schumacher once during OTC training. He flew down to Texas for an exercise we were doing. And I was really proud because he told me I gave him the best brief that he'd ever gotten. And
wow.
yeah, he was, yeah, you know, Delta is full of people that either were legendary or became legendary. The unfortunate thing for me is the person I had my problem with in Panama was their, you know, of the new Delta. He was the first legendary person there.
Of the new school, so to speak, the new class
you know, that had done something that name. So
wow,
you don't, you just
stood no chance.
Yeah.
No chance.
Nope.
And yet we've got a few questions here that'll end up nicely. Let's see, Jason. A few of these I don't think we've reached time period wise, but I think it'll still be okay. Just to compare to other guests, which are mostly SOG vets, what was your operational freedom like during your career? Any times you wish you had more freedom, or times you could do whatever necessary?
Up to this time, like the smaller units you're in and more independently you act, you have more freedom of movement. When we get to later, the next part of my career, there'll come a turn where I go back from being on SF team to where I'm doing compartmented classified missions in other countries, and I'm on my own a lot of the time. And so then you have a lot of freedom. And later in Afghanistan, when I go on the jawbreaker teams, you're the first in. There's no rules, there's no body, there's no headquarters element. So it's you make it. And over some of these missions that I wound up doing, I got known as the guy you could drop into an unknown, chaotic place, and he'll make sense out of it. And so I was given a lot of latitude. And then in the agency, you know, I also got, it's a long story, but got more latitude than what you're supposed to get in the agency. But you always have your morals, your ethics, the legalities that you have to deal with. There's other things. I did become known as a rule breaker in the agency, but you can, you have to know the time and the place where it's the best thing operationally and for mission success to break a rule, because every time you do, that's a career choice. So yeah,
one decision away from ending a career.
Oh yeah.
This, considering this might be a question that I need to save. Let's see here. It's talking about singleton missions, and I think it's probably going to be best for when we talk, since you just mentioned later on in your career. I think that might be better for a part 2, since talking about working alone.
Yeah.
Mary Jo, I'll save that. Just got a picture of it, and we'll write that down. Anthony, when and where was Mr. Harrington in Yemen? In 1997, I was in I can't pronounce that. TICD.
Yeah, so I went there in 98, and I was there part of 98 and into 99. And I worked initially out of the embassy in Sana'a and later out of Aden.
And we do have some great photos for that when that comes up later on in part 2. That will we've got some great photos for part 2.
Well, I'm sure good stories out of Taiz. I really wanted to try to make it to Taiz and some of those other places, but I got tied up with things in Aden.
That's what we're here to to listen to. Anything you're willing to share with us? I think this is a weapon question. Yep, awareness with Chris. What is your guest opinion on the HK 417 versus the SR 25K? Don't know what those are.
That's me. I don't know. The first.
I know the HK 417 is a rifle, but other than that, nothing.
Well, just my experience with HKs was in Delta. You train for certain missions with the MP5 or MP5 SD, which are critical, and so you became very well used to those. And then my next time was when I was in Colombia on that mission. The agency handed me it's like an MP5, but it was chambered in 7.62.
Whoa!
Now talk about heavy. To have a double stack magazine of 7.62 on that little rifle strapped over your neck was heavy. But I didn't even know that they made something like that. But I'm sorry. I have a feeling those two weapons might be sniper weapons, and I don't have other experience with any of the more exotic sniper weapons.
I think the SR definitely is. I think the HK is like a assault, or like a regular, like assaulter weapon. I think the SEALs may use it. I'm not up to date on the tier 1 guys today. I apologize. Awareness with Chris. Anthony joining late. If it's been asked, this might come up later, but if you'd like to talk about it, Yemen stories will come later. Do you have any? I guess you could just say yes or no. Will we be hearing about Billy Waugh in part 2 or any men like that?
I didn't know. Billy Waugh wasn't around where I was at that time. I was it for military guys there for a while, and I am taking part in a series on the USS bombing of the USS Cole that will come out later this year. You can go to the big media website and coming attractions or new releases. Somebody talks a little bit about that. I can't release what that work or who's going to have that, but it's a 3-part series, and I'm the early part talking about the lead up to the bombing of the Cole. Then Kirk Lippold, the captain of the Cole, is going to be the next episode about what happened and everything that he and the crew did after.
Wow.
And then finally, the 3rd episode will be about the investigation and ultimate bringing to justice of those guys.
That I'm sure that's going to be outstanding. And when we get into some of that on part 2, I'm very interested to hearing about some of that as well. But I think one of your family members has actually joined us. Cousin Gary, our family's always proud of him and his service to our country. I grew up looking up to him and always looking forward to when we could hear stories from his deployment. Awesome. Glad you're watching and enjoying the show with us, man.
Thank you, Cousin Phyllis.
Gotta love family. And our last question for today, I'm sure everybody will be getting their questions ready for part 2. Jason, he joined late. Throughout all the schools you went to, which was the most physically demanding? Always hear of scuba being an absolute beast, which we did mention earlier.
Yeah. I don't have one. I think it's a lot of schools, you hear the bullshit, because I even heard that in the medical schools, right?
Oh,
that,
yeah.
SF
school.
No, every time you go to a school, this will be the hardest whatever days of your life, and I'm like, yeah, bring it, man. I already had it, let's see. And there are different things. Scuba school is very intense physically. When your 2-mile run is 12 minutes, that's a lot. And then all the other PT, and then what made scuba school hard was they push you to the breaking point of your fear of being in the water and running out of breath, because I have had cases now of diving where an emergency comes up and having been pushed into that fear zone, you know, you can take life-saving steps instead of succumbing to the waves of panic and fear that come over you. And it's that way with other training. Physically demanding, I don't know. I mean, I got to be honest, Amphib Recon was hard.
Oh, I can only imagine.
OTC was hard. The Q course wasn't, I didn't find that as hard for me as others. I went to ACE, Advanced Special Operations Technique course, and that's funny because it's called the Ranger School of Writing. So it wasn't hard physically, but yeah, the writing and producing products that you wrote was, you know, I pushed it all the way to the end with that.
Ranger School of Writing. I love that.
and different. Yeah. So yeah, I don't have the hardest school. They're all, every school you go to, they have something you want, a qualification, an entrance to a fraternity, a badge, maybe some people badge hunt. And, you know, you got to learn to take what they want to dish out. And if you want to get through that course, and I never, yeah, I'm always been a try it and give it all I have person. Selection was the only thing that I ever specially practiced for my first time, and then I overdid it by doing that. So, yeah, I don't think they're all hard in their own way, but yeah, there's no hardest.
Yeah, I can imagine, just like you said, they've all got their little part that's going to be difficult for you no matter what, and you just got to stick it out and keep going.
Yeah, in sniper instructor school, it's the grading on the stalks, and there's very little margin there. So that, and plus the shooting test at the end, you know, those were difficult things. You know, so it's different stresses for different schools.
Wow. That's it's always interesting hearing about all these different schools guys go to, and you seem to be one of the guys that have been to quite a few schools. I know some of our other guests have, but it seems like you've been through
we've
quite
got
a few different branches of schools here.
Yeah, we've got others I didn't even name just because I had a long career, and I don't know, people wanted me to go to schools because I had a high success rate, and
seems to be.
You know, and the farm was really hard for me at the agency, not
that
for other reasons, for other reasons that we'll talk about when we get to that, but the farm had its challenges for me coming from my background, going into, again, now it's another whole way of being and living and ethos and, you know, the characteristics that make someone successful in the agency as a case officer were not necessarily either what they thought I was because of my background and who I was. So it's when you go somewhere to a school where it's culturally different than how you are or how you're perceived by those instructors, you could be in for a hard.
Yeah, I can only imagine a special forces Delta guy having to shed that skin and get into your CIA skin, so to speak, would be a little bit of a mind shift there for you. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because I will be very anxious to hear about the farm. Seen a lot of movies and people talk about it, and I'll be anxious to hear someone first person share a little bit with us. But that is all of our questions for today, everybody. Maybe y'all, since y'all have seen a little bit of what we've already spoken about, if you've got questions you want to think of for part 2, or if you see what we've gotten planned for part 2 and want to start thinking of them, please do, because we'll be doing another Q&A session. But Mr. Gary, is there anything you'd like to say before we close out part 1 today?
No, hey, thanks a lot, Bud. And, I appreciate a chance to talk to this. This is all, hey, they're just stories, and we all have our own out there. Mine might be a little different than most people's, but that's just, but they're no, my stories and experiences are no better or no worse than anybody else's. And I'm just like all the listeners out there. It's the regular person. And sometimes regular people can be driven to certain things, and maybe we'll get a chance next time to talk about some of those, like, the after you take a 35-year career and, after looking back at it, what's important and not. But yeah, I'm just like everybody else out there. And we're capable of driving ourselves to do a lot when we focus and make that our goal.
Wow, you are a humble man, if I may say so myself. All righty, guys. I will as soon as we pick out a day for part 2, I will let y'all know immediately. But stay tuned. We've got 2 more shows this week, Wednesday or Thursday and Friday. So just stay tuned, and we'll see you guys later. So